The security footage runs exactly 47 seconds, but those 47 seconds destroyed everything I thought I knew about the world. In the grainy infrared recording, a massive bipedal figure appears, wraps a giant hand around my dog's neck, and carries her into the darkness, as if she weighed nothing at all. Duke, her name, was 8 years old, jet black with one blue eye and one brown. The smartest dog I ever trained, and the last gift my daughter gave me before cancer took her life. Now Duke is gone, taken by something that should not exist. And I am left with footage no one believes and a truth eating me alive from the inside out. My name is Samuel Carson, and I'm about to tell you why I sold my family's 200-acre farm in northern Idaho, why I can't look at another dog without breaking down, and why I sleep with every light in the house burning all night. What happened on my land between September and December last year was not random predation or a case of mistaken identity. It was deliberate, calculated, and personal. The thing that took Duke had been watching us for months, learning our routines, waiting for the perfect moment to teach me that humans are not the apex predators we like to think we are. I inherited the farm from my Uncle Theodore last March. He died suddenly of a heart attack at 74, left no children, and named me his sole beneficiary in a will that surprised everyone, including me. I hadn't seen Ted in 15 years. A family dispute over my grandmother's estate had driven a wedge between him and my father. But apparently, he had been keeping tabs on me through social media and mutual acquaintances, my veterinary career, my marriage and later divorce, and most of all, my daughter Emma's battle with leukemia, which ended 3 years ago when she was only 12. The letter from his lawyer included a handwritten note from Ted that simply read, "The land needs someone who understands loss and isn't afraid of hard work. Especially the dogs need you. Take care of them, as I know you will." It wasn't until I arrived at the property that I understood what he meant by the dogs. Ted had been running an informal rescue for working breeds, taking in abandoned or unwanted border collies, Australian shepherds, and cattle dogs from across the Pacific Northwest. 23 dogs were being kept on the farm, from aging pups to old gray-muzzled veterans who had spent their lives herding sheep that no longer existed. The property sat in a valley 45 minutes from Coeur d'Alene, bordered on 3 sides by national forest, and was reachable only by a winding dirt road that turned to mud soup during the spring thaw and was nearly impassable after heavy snowfall. The nearest neighbors lived 7 miles away, an elderly couple who ran a small organic vegetable farm and kept to themselves. There was almost no cell service except for one spot on the hill behind the barn where you could sometimes get a single bar if you held your phone just right. The main house was a 2-story Craftsman built in 1923. The bones of the place were sound, but it badly needed the updates Ted had clearly deferred for years. The electrical system was a dangerous maze of old knobs and knob and tube wiring tied into amateur fixtures. The plumbing groaned and complained like an angry ghost every time you turned a tap, but the structure itself was solid. The roof was only 5 years old, and the wraparound porch with its mountain view made every morning feel like a gift. Even after Emma's death, I told myself that gifts were just disappointments waiting to happen. The dogs lived in a renovated barn that Ted had turned into the most sophisticated canine facility I'd ever seen outside a working kennel. Individual runs had heated floors, there was an indoor training arena, a veterinary clinic that would embarrass many practices, and a food prep area that would make a restaurant kitchen jealous. He'd spent a fortune creating a sanctuary for rescued dogs, and from the meticulously organized records I found in his filing system, he'd placed more than 300 animals into new homes over the past decade. Duke stood out immediately. According to Ted's notes, she had been taken in 2 years earlier after her owner, an elderly rancher, moved into assisted living. Unlike many of the dogs who buzzed with frantic energy or shrank into corners to nurse psychological wounds, Duke carried a calm, solemn composure that painfully reminded me of Emma during her treatments. She never complained or demanded attention, but she watched everything with an almost human intelligence. The other dogs naturally deferred to her. At mealtimes, she would wait until others had started before approaching her bowl. On walks, she stayed at the rear, gently nudging stragglers and keeping the group together. When fights broke out, which happened occasionally when so many dogs shared the same space, Duke would place herself between combatants, not aggressively, but simply by being there, and the conflict would dissolve. Within days, she became my shadow, sleeping outside my bedroom door, accompanying me everywhere, sitting beside me on the porch during long evenings when memories of Emma threatened to pull me under. The first signs that something was wrong appeared in late September, about 6 months after I took over the farm. I began finding tracks around the property that matched no animal I knew. They were bipedal, humanoid in shape, but gigantic, with strides measuring over 7 feet. The prints appeared overnight in the soft soil around the dog runs, circled the chicken coop I had set up for fresh eggs, and led from the tree line to about 50 feet from the house before vanishing. I told myself it had to be a prank, some local teenager with too much time on his hands, and a novelty pair of Sasquatch feet from a costume shop trying to scare the city boy who inherited Ted's house. But the impressions were too detailed, too deep. They demanded weight and pressure no kid could fake. Toe impressions were clearly visible in each print, and the gait pattern matched bipedal locomotion, not someone wearing prosthetic feet trying to walk normally. The dogs knew something was off before I fully admitted it to myself. They grew reluctant to go out after dark, clustering near the barn door and whining when I tried to take them for evening walks. Many times, all 23 dogs would fall silent halfway through their familiar nighttime chorus. That dead silence in the woods only happens when a predator is near. Duke in particular grew tense, spending hours staring at the trees with her hackles raised. A low growl rose in her chest that I had never heard before. Then came the wood knock's sharp, deliberate sounds, as if someone were striking a tree with a bat, echoing from the forest at random intervals through the night. Sometimes just a single knock, sometimes 3 or 4 in quick succession. Once I grabbed a flashlight and a rifle and tried to track the sound, but it always stopped the moment I stepped into the trees, only to resume once I returned home. It felt like being watched, studied, tested, like it wanted me to know it was there, but not to reveal itself on my terms. The chicken massacre happened on October 15. I'd gone into town for supplies, leaving the dogs locked up in the barn and the chickens in their reinforced coop, the wire wrapped with heavy steel specifically to keep out raccoons and foxes. I came back to find all 17 birds dead, not eaten, but slaughtered with precision. Each neck had been snapped cleanly, and the bodies were arranged in a perfect circle inside the run. The wire hadn't been cut or torn. It had been peeled back as if someone opened a can, requiring a strength no ordinary predator possesses. But what actually made me sick was what I found dragged across the ground inside the run. Something had ripped along the dirt with a crude, unmistakable mark, a 4-toed dog-like track, and beside it, a larger bipedal human-like print. The message was clear and unambiguous. Whoever or whatever killed my chickens knew about the dogs, had watched long enough to understand their importance to me, and wanted me to know it could take them whenever it pleased. I installed security cameras the next day, 6 high-definition units with infrared night vision, motion detection, and cloud storage, uploaded via the satellite internet I had the techs install after I moved in. I positioned them to cover the barn, the house, the remains of the chicken coop, and the 3 main paths into the woods. If there was something out there, I was going to catch it on film. I told myself that if whatever was stalking my property left evidence, I would have proof even the most skeptical deputy sheriff couldn't dismiss. For 2 weeks, the cameras recorded nothing unusual. Deer wandered the yard, a black bear investigated the trash, and the regular parade of raccoons and opossums treated the place like a 24-hour buffet. I began to relax, convincing myself the troublemakers had moved on, perhaps driven off by the obvious surveillance. The dogs gradually returned to their routines, though Duke remained vigilant, watching the tree line, and I noticed she'd begun sleeping in the bedroom instead of outside the door. The morning of November 3 changed everything. I woke to find all 23 dogs huddled in the far corner of the barn, pressed together in absolute terror. None would come when called, not even Duke, who trembled like a leaf when I approached. It took me 20 minutes of gentle coaxing to get them close enough to check for injuries. No one was injured, at least not physically, but whatever had traumatized them had struck so deeply. Some had lost bladder control, and one of the older herding dogs had ripped its bloody claws trying to dig through the barn wall. The security footage from the previous night begins normally, the dogs moving about the runs, settling into their sleeping spots, the usual small adjustments as they made themselves comfortable. Then, at 2:47 a.m., a dog suddenly stands and faces the main barn door, its body rigid with focus. For 3 minutes, it and the others remain motionless. 23 pairs of eyes are fixed on something the camera cannot see. Then, as if responding to some inaudible signal, they all bolt to the far corner where I found them climbing over one another in a desperate attempt to get as far from the door as possible. The exterior camera covering the barn showed why. A humanoid silhouette stood just outside the door, roughly 8 feet tall, and covered in black hair that seemed to absorb the infrared illumination. It did not try to break in or even touch the door. It simply stood there for exactly 3 minutes. Then it lifted something enormous and pressed it against the door. Its fingers splayed wide and almost greeting or a warning. The hand was human-shaped but wrong in every way. The fingers far too long and the palm able to cover a dinner plate. After holding this pose for 30 more seconds, the creature turned and walked back into the woods with a purposeful, flexible gait that suggested absolute confidence in its territory. I drove to a spot on my land with cell reception and called the sheriff's office that morning. Deputy Marcus Webb arrived 2 hours later, a young officer who clearly thought he was wasting his time until I showed him the footage. His face went pale when he saw the creature press its hand to the barn door, and he asked to watch it 3 more times before he spoke. When he finally found his voice, all he said was, "You need to leave. Pack up and get out of here." But I couldn't leave. The farm was all I had left after Emma's death and the subsequent divorce. My veterinary clinic had been sold to pay off the debts from failed experimental treatments. My ex-wife remarried and moved to Florida, building the family she always wanted, while I was left with memories and a grief that felt like drowning. I refused to be driven off. Ted's farm and those dogs were my second chance, the reason I kept going when everything else seemed meaningless. I would not let some oversized primate, no matter how impossible its existence, force me out of the only place that still felt like home. I reinforced the barn with steel plates over the doors and industrial locks that would require power tools to breach. I added more cameras, bringing the total to 12, making sure no corner of the property went unmonitored. I bought a high-power rifle with a thermal scope and enough ammunition to fight a small war. I even contacted an online group of cryptozoology researchers, shared the footage, and asked for advice on handling what they insisted was a residential Sasquatch scenario. Their suggestions ranged from blasting loud music to leaving food offerings at the forest edge in an attempt to establish a peaceful relationship. I tried both cranking death metal from speakers mounted on the barn and leaving out apples and raw meat as offerings. The offerings were never taken, and the music only seemed to agitate the dogs further. The pattern of visits changed once I fortified the place. Instead of approaching the buildings, the creature began to appear at the edges of the property, always within camera range but never close enough for a clear shot. It would stand in the trees for hours, a dark sentry never moving except to tilt its head as if listening to something I could not hear. Sometimes there were 2. Once I counted 3. Distinct shapes stretched along the tree line as if encircling the land. The dogs refused to leave the barn after dark and some stopped eating regularly. I had to begin hand-feeding them, coaxing each bite as if they were sickly pups rather than healthy adults. Duke suffered the most. She lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks despite my best efforts. She sat by the window staring into the woods, occasionally letting out a whine that broke my heart. It was as if she knew something terrible was coming but could not convey the nature of the threat. I started sleeping in the dog barn, making a small bed in the corner where I could watch both the door and the window. The rifle never left my side, and I slept in short spurts, waking at every sound. The accumulated exhaustion was destructive. I made foolish mistakes during the day, forgetting to lock a gate, leaving tools scattered across the yard. Once, I drove all the way into town only to realize I'd left the barn door wide open, but I couldn't let down my guard. The cameras showed the things continued to visit nightly, growing bolder, coming closer, testing our defenses with an intelligence that suggested they were planning something specific. The problem with prolonged fear is that it wears you down in a way manual labor never could. Your body remains on high alert, draining resources faster than you can restore them. Your mind races through scenarios and contingencies until thought dissolves into a tangle of paranoia and justified concern. You begin to see patterns that may not exist, hear threats in every natural sound, and read danger into every shadow. By the end of November, I was running on adrenaline and stubbornness, a combination unsustainable but felt essential for survival. I began calling my sister in Seattle every day, without telling her what was happening. It wasn't about the creatures anymore, it was about hearing another human voice. My sister could sense the strain in mine and begged me to come visit for Thanksgiving to take a break from the farm. I almost agreed. I even started looking into boarding options for the dogs. But I couldn't leave them. Whatever was stalking us had made the dogs its focus. To abandon them, even temporarily, felt like signing their death warrants. Thanksgiving came and went with me alone at the farm, sharing a turkey dinner with 23 traumatized dogs while watching the tree line for signs of movement. The creatures didn't appear that night, the first time they'd broken their pattern since early November. I let myself believe they had moved on, found another territory to haunt, or other victims to torment. But Duke's behavior suggested otherwise. She paced the kennel relentlessly, stopping only to stare at the door with a tension that raised gooseflesh on my arms. She sensed something I could not, a shift in the pattern invisible to my human perception. The first weekend of December brought an early blizzard that dumped 2 feet of powder into the valley, rendering the road completely impassable. I was truly trapped on the property, with enough supplies to last about 2 weeks if I rationed carefully. The satellite internet went down, cutting me off from the outside world and leaving the cameras useful only for local recording. The isolation was total, suffocating. If something happened, if the creatures decided to escalate their harassment, no help could reach me until the county plows cleared the road, which from past years I knew could take a week or longer. The snow revealed just how closely we were being watched. Tracks circled the property in overlapping loops, some fresh, others days old, forming a pattern that suggested constant surveillance by multiple individuals. The prints led to every building, every fence, every piece of equipment on the farm. They gathered beneath windows, clustered around doors, lingered near every possible point of entry. But most disturbing were the trails leading to and from the small cemetery on the hill, where Ted had buried the farm dogs over the past 40 years. The snow there was churned up, as if something had spent hours examining the headstones and disturbing the once peaceful ground. I tried to maintain some semblance of routine despite the circumstances. The dogs needed exercise, danger or not. So I began taking them out in shifts, during daylight, never more than 3 at a time, never far from the barn. Duke always insisted on being in the first group, positioning herself between me and the forest like a bodyguard. The loyalty was heartbreaking, because I knew I could never protect her the way she tried to protect me from whatever was out there. My weapons and barricades were stalling tactics, not real solutions. December 10th was a Wednesday, I remember, because I had been counting the days until the road might clear enough for escape. The temperature had risen above freezing for 2 days straight, and the snow was beginning to melt. Another day or two of warm weather, and I might be able to get the truck through if I chained all 4 tires and drove slow. I had begun packing essentials, mentally sorting which dogs were strong enough to make the trip and which might have to be left behind. That evening started like any other. I fed the dogs. Noticed Duke once again refused food, her body wasting away before my eyes. I resolved to call the vet in Coeur d'Alene as soon as the phones came back, maybe even risk driving if her condition worsened. After feeding, I let the dogs out one last time before dark, standing guard with the rifle as they did their business and hurried back inside. Duke was the last to return, pausing at the threshold to look back into the woods with an expression I can only describe as resigned acceptance, as if she knew something inevitable was about to happen. I secured the kennel for the night, double-checking every lock and testing the reinforced doors to be sure they held firm. The dogs settled into their usual fearful huddle, though Duke remained near the door, sitting upright like a sphinx, her eyes never leaving the entrance. I sat up on my cot with the rifle across my lap, prepared for another sleepless night of vigilance. The wind had picked up, howling through the cracks in the barn siding and throwing dancing shadows across the LED emergency lights I had strung overhead. At exactly 11:17 p.m., Duke stood up. Not in the tense, alert posture she'd held for weeks when danger was near, but with a calm, deliberate motion, as though she had reached a decision. She walked to the kennel door and sat directly before it, tail giving a gentle wag I hadn't seen in over a month. The other dogs watched her with visible confusion, some whining softly, others retreating deeper into their corners. Duke turned back once to look at me, and I swear there was an apology in her eyes. Then she did something that haunts me still. She began scratching at the door as if she wanted out. I ordered her back, called her sharply, even grabbed for her collar to pull her away. But she resisted with a determination I had never seen in her before, actually growling at me when I tried to drag her back. The other dogs erupted, barking and howling in panicked chaos. I almost missed the sound that changed everything. 3 deliberate knocks on the kennel door, hard enough to rattle the entire structure. The dogs fell silent instantly, pressing against the far wall so tightly I feared they might crush each other. Only Duke remained at the door, tail still wagging faintly, a soft whine in her throat that sounded unnervingly like communication. 3 more knocks followed, the same measured rhythm, and Duke answered with 3 sharp barks. She was responding, engaging in some form of exchange I could not comprehend. I raised the rifle, aimed at the door, finger tightening on the trigger, ready to fire through the wood if I had to. But Duke turned and fixed me with an intense gaze, pleading, unmistakable. Then she pawed at the door again, before returning to me. She took the barrel of the rifle gently in her mouth and pushed it down toward the floor. The message could not have been clearer. Don't shoot. Then she went back to the door and sat waiting. The handle began to turn, not violently, not forced, but slowly, as if someone were testing whether it was locked, which should have been impossible, since the handle was 8 feet off the ground and secured from the inside by a deadbolt requiring a key. Yet I saw it rotate a full 30 degrees before returning to its original position, then turn again. Duke's tail wagged faster, and she made a sound I had never heard from any dog before, a layered vocalization that carried a complexity beyond simple animal communication. Then the locks began to open, not broken, not forced, simply unlocking one by one, as though someone outside had the keys. The deadbolt slid back. The chain lock dropped away. The reinforcement bar I had mounted across the frame lifted from its brackets and fell to the floor with a metallic crash. I stood frozen, the rifle trembling in my hands. I watched Duke's tail wag with growing enthusiasm as our defenses were methodically undone by something that had no need to breach human security, only to disregard it. The door swung open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. The emergency lights that should have lit the yard were dead, and even the moon and stars seemed veiled by a sudden shroud of cloud. Duke rose and stepped toward that darkness without hesitation, pausing only at the doorway to glance back at me one final time. In that instant, I saw Emma in her eyes, the same brave face my daughter had worn as she entered her last surgery, fully aware of what awaited her, yet determined to face it with dignity. Then Duke walked into the darkness and vanished. I wanted to follow, to fight, to do anything other than stand there like a coward while my dog marched to certain death, but my legs wouldn't move. My voice failed me. The rifle in my hands felt as though it weighed 1,000 pounds. The other dogs huddled against the wall in a trembling mass of fur and fear, their eyes reflecting the dim emergency glow like dozens of terrified stars. And then it appeared in the doorway. Not suddenly, not with drama, but with the casual confidence of something that could have entered at any moment, and only now chose to show itself. The security footage that had haunted me hadn't prepared me for the reality of its presence. It stood at least 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur that seemed to shift and ripple as if alive on its own. Its face was almost human, yet wrong in every essential way, with eyes that shone with an intelligence beyond any animal and beyond human understanding. It stooped slightly to pass beneath the frame, and when it stood straight, its head nearly brushed the rafters of the 15-ton barn. In its arms, held with a startling tenderness, was Duke. She didn't resist. She didn't struggle. She was utterly calm, her tail still wagging gently, her head resting against that massive chest, as if she were being cradled by someone utterly trustworthy. The creature looked at me with those impossible eyes, and I felt something stir in my mind. Not words exactly, but a form of communication that bypassed language altogether. It showed me images. Duke as a puppy with another owner, Duke guarding sheep from wolves, Duke watching over a baby's crib, Duke doing what she had always done, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. More images followed, forests stretching for miles in every direction. Other beings like this one, dozens, maybe hundreds, living in the spaces between human civilization. And among them, dogs. So many dogs, across generations, living not as prey, not as pets, but as companions, recognized for a loyalty and intelligence humanity had long forgotten. The creature shifted Duke in its arms, holding her tighter but still gently, as though preparing her for a long journey with a precious burden. Duke looked at me once more, her tail wagging harder now, her whole body trembling with something I could only describe as joy. She was ready, eager, even for whatever was calling to a part of her deeper than domestication. The being turned toward the door, and I found my voice ragged enough to manage one word: please. It stopped, turned back. Those alien eyes locked on mine for a long moment, and another flood of images poured through me. The farm, empty and abandoned, dogs rehomed with loving families, myself in a small apartment somewhere far away, safe but diminished. Then another path, the farm thriving, new dogs arriving often. My work continuing Ted's legacy, but with an understanding of boundaries I'd never before recognized. The forest and its inhabitants left undisturbed, and in return, the farm left in peace. Duke was the price of that peace, the bridge between two worlds that should never cross but had. And then I understood. It was Duke who had made this choice. Whether through some form of communication I couldn't perceive, or through instincts older than human civilization, she had recognized what the beings offered and decided where she belonged. She had been saying goodbye for weeks, staying close, not out of fear but out of love. My hand, watching Duke's tail wag with growing enthusiasm as our defenses were methodically removed by something that didn't need to touch them to defeat them. The door flew wide and revealed only darkness beyond the threshold. The emergency lights that should have lit the yard were dead, and even the moon and stars seemed veiled by a sudden bank of cloud. Duke rose and stepped into that darkness without hesitation, pausing only on the threshold to look back at me one last time. In that moment, I saw Emma in her eyes, the same brave face my daughter had worn as she went into her final surgery. Aware of the risk but determined to meet it with dignity, Duke walked into the dark and vanished. I wanted to follow, to fight, to do anything other than stand there like a coward while my dog walked towards certain death. But my legs would not move. My voice failed me. The rifle felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds in my useless hands. The other dogs were silent, pressed against the far wall in a trembling mass of fur and fear, their eyes reflecting the pale emergency glow like dozens of terrified stars. Then it appeared in the doorway, not with a sudden flourish or theatrics, but with the casual confidence of something that could have come in at any time and only now chose to reveal itself. The security footage that had obsessed me had not prepared me for the actuality of its presence. It stood at least 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur that seemed to ripple and shift as though it moved independently. Its face was almost human, but wrong in every essential way, with eyes that reflected an intelligence far beyond any animal and beyond human comprehension. It stooped slightly to pass through the frame, and when it straightened inside the barn, its head nearly brushed the rafters. In its arms, cradled with surprising gentleness, was Duke. She did not resist or struggle. She was utterly calm, her tail still wagging softly, her head resting against that massive chest as if being held by something utterly trustworthy. The creature looked at me with those impossible eyes, and something stirred in my mind, not words exactly, but a form of communication that bypassed language altogether. It showed me images: Duke as a puppy with another owner, Duke guarding sheep from wolves, Duke standing watch over a baby's cradle, Duke doing what she had always done, protecting those who could not protect themselves. More images followed, forests stretching for miles in every direction. Other beings like this one, dozens, maybe hundreds, living in the spaces between human civilization, and among them, dogs. So many dogs, through many generations, living wild but not wild, integrated into something I could not fully comprehend but recognized as a social form. The creatures did not see dogs as prey or as mere pets, but as companions, recognizing in them a loyalty and intelligence humans had long forgotten. The creature shifted Duke in its arms, holding her tighter, yet still gently, as if preparing her for a long journey with something precious. Duke looked at me one more time. Her tail wagged harder, her whole body trembling with something I could only call joy. She was ready, eager, even for whatever called to a part of her deeper than domestication. The being turned toward the door, and I rasped one word: please. It stopped, turned back, and those alien eyes locked on mine for a long, intense moment. Another wave of images flooded me. I saw the farm empty and abandoned. I saw the dogs found homes with loving families. I saw myself in a small apartment somewhere far away, safe, but diminished. Then I saw an alternate vision. The farm thriving, new dogs arriving regularly. I continuing Ted's work, but with a new understanding of boundaries I had never grasped. The forest and its inhabitants left undisturbed, and in return, the farm left in peace. Duke was the price of that peace. A bridge between two worlds that should not have crossed but had. And then I understood. Duke had made the choice. Whether through some form of communication I could not perceive, or through instincts older than human civilization, she had recognized what the beings offered and decided where she belonged. She had been saying goodbye for weeks, staying near me, not out of fear but out of love. Because of that love, she had given me as much time as she could before answering a call stronger than our bond. The protection she had always given me was now being extended to every dog on the farm. Her sacrifice ensured their safety. The creature made a sound, not animal, not human, but somehow conveying gratitude. It understood what Duke meant to me, acknowledged the loss I was enduring, and offered whatever comfort it could through that strange psychic connection. Then it turned and walked back into the dark with Duke in its arms, disappearing completely as if they had never existed. The door slammed shut behind them, and I heard locks disengage one by one, securing the barn from the inside without any visible mechanism. I found the footage from the camera the next morning. After a night spent collapsed on the floor, the dogs slowly inching closer until I was buried in a warm, comforting pile of fur. They understood something important had happened. Duke's sacrifice changed the fundamental dynamic of our situation. The fear that had shaped their existence for months dissolved, replaced by a quiet calm, an atmosphere of grief crossed with relief. The footage showed everything and nothing. The creature approached the door, the locks opened on their own. Duke stepped outside willingly. The creature lifted her with obvious care, and in the space between frames, they both vanished. What the camera could not capture was the communication, the understanding, the choice made with full awareness of its consequences. To any observer, it looked like my dog had been stolen. Only I knew she had gone willingly, perhaps even eagerly, towards something that called the wild part of her, that domestication had never quite extinguished. The tracks in the snow told a different story than a simple abduction. Duke's prints walked calmly beside the giant bipedal prints for nearly 100 feet before both sets disappeared at the tree line. No sign of struggling, no sign of pain, just two different beings stepping into the wild together. I followed the tracks as far as I could, calling Duke's name, though I knew she would not return, and probably did not want to. The forest swallowed my voice as if it had swallowed her, accepting them both into its ancient silence. I stayed on the farm through the winter, partly because the road remained impassable, and partly because I needed time to process what had happened. The creatures never returned. True to whatever strange agreement had been made in that psychic exchange, they did not come back. The remaining dogs gradually returned to normal, though sometimes they would gather at the barn door at night, not out of fear but out of something like reverence, as if honoring Duke's sacrifice. I would find them in the morning arranged in a semicircle, heads bowed as if in prayer. Spring finally came. The snow melted, revealing a farm that felt completely different even though it looked the same. I continued Ted's work with the rescue dogs, finding homes for those ready to go and sheltering those who could not. But I became more selective about which dogs I kept long-term, now understanding that some breeds are born to live wild, carrying in their genes a kinship with things beyond human understanding. Those dogs, the ones who stared too long at the edge of the woods, or howled harmonies that seemed to answer unheard calls, I placed carefully in homes far from the wild. I never reported Duke missing or stolen. What would I say? That the Sasquatch had taken her, but she had volunteered? That she had chosen them over me, and that her sacrifice had protected the other dogs through some bargain I cannot fully explain? Instead, I told anyone who asked that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep, which was not entirely untrue. The Duke I had known, the companion who slept by my bed and watched my every step, was gone. What remained in the woods was something else, something that had always been there inside her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Sometimes, late on a still, moonlit night, I hear a howl from the woods, not the sound of wolves or prairie coyotes, but something more complex, more purposeful. And sometimes I swear I can make out a familiar voice within that chorus. A howl that sounds like Duke, but fuller, richer, more complete than any sound she ever made on the farm. It tells me she is okay, that she is where she belongs, that her choice was right. I want to believe that is true. I need to believe it, because without that belief, the fear and cowardice that nearly stopped me from trying to save her would consume me, too painful to think about. The security footage sits on a hard drive in the drawer of my desk. 47 seconds that changed everything. I've never shared it publicly, never sent it to the cryptozoology groups, eager to treat it as proof for their beliefs. It feels too private, too sacred, as if sharing it would break the understanding forged by Duke's sacrifice. But sometimes I watch it late at night, when missing her becomes unbearable. I search for signs I might have overlooked, moments where my intervention could have changed the outcome. I never find them. Each viewing only confirms what I already knew that night. Duke chose her path, and I was only a witness to her decision. I've seen evidence that I'm not alone in this experience. Online forums for lost pets hold stories that follow familiar patterns. Dogs acting strangely for weeks before disappearing. Giant footprints around the house. Security footage showing things that shouldn't exist. The owners always seem bewildered, grief-stricken, searching for explanations that make sense in a rational world. I want to reach out, to share what I know, but I never do. Some truths are too dangerous to spread, and the agreement protecting my farm might not extend to others who speak too freely about what lives in the woods. My sister eventually convinced me to go to therapy, worried about the isolation and deepening depression she saw in me. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a psychologist in Coeur d'Alene who specializes in grief counseling, listened to the carefully edited version of events I offered. Duke disappearing one night, taken by what I assumed was a wolf or mountain lion. She nodded with sympathy and spoke about the complicated grief of losing a pet, especially one so closely tied to my memories of my daughter. We spent months working through the layers of loss. Emma, my marriage, my career, and now Duke. But I could never tell her the whole truth. Never explain that Duke didn't fall victim to some predator, but chose to leave. Her departure was a sacrifice, not a tragedy. The farm thrives now in ways it never did under Ted's management or my own earlier care. The dogs are healthier, happier, more confident. Local rescue organizations send me their hardest cases dogs other facilities can't handle, and somehow, I connect with them. I think it's because they sense the pact, feel on some instinctive level that this place is protected, that Duke's sacrifice created a refuge that stretches beyond physical boundaries. They arrive frightened and broken, but leave whole, carrying with them an undefinable quality that makes them extraordinary companions for their new families. Yet every success feels hollow without Duke to share it. Every achievement, every rehabilitated dog, every letter from a grateful adopter feels incomplete because she isn't here to witness it. I find myself talking to her empty collar, which hangs beside the kennel door as a memorial. I tell her about the day's events, ask her advice on tough cases. Sometimes I imagine I hear her answers in the wind through the trees, or in the creak of the kennels at night, a quiet approval or gentle guidance beyond ordinary communication. The other dogs seem to remember her too. New arrivals are always led to the spot where she used to sleep, as if the pack is introducing them to their absent alpha. They sniff around the area, then look toward the forest with an expression that suggests they understand something profound. Some howl mournfully, others sit in silent contemplation, but all seem to sense that Duke's absence isn't the same as death, that she exists somewhere beyond the edge of the property, watching over them from a distance no miles can measure. I've made my peace with the creature, or at least reached an understanding that allows coexistence. I deliberately leave parts of my land untouched, never venturing into areas that feel marked by unseen boundaries. In return, nothing disturbs the peace of the farm. Predators stay away from the dogs. The gardens yield abundant harvests without pest problems. Even the weather seems gentler, more forgiving. Here, the storms pass around us instead of through us, as if Duke's sacrifice had created a protective bubble that covered everything within the boundaries of the property. But the cost of that protection weighs on me every day. Every adoption of a joyful dog reminds me of the one who will never come home. Every peaceful night echoes the terror that came before it. Every flicker of movement at the tree line makes me wonder if she's out there, watching, approving, or disapproving of how I've honored our bargain. The guilt of letting her go, even knowing I had no real choice, eats at me like acid. A better man might have fought harder, found another way, saved both Duke and the farm, but I wasn't that better man. I was only the witness to something impossible, and the one who survived carrying nothing but the knowledge. Winter has come again. The first snow lies thick on the mountains. The dogs are safe in their warm kennels, well fed and cared for, protected by Duke's sacrifice. Each evening I stand on the porch, staring toward the forest, wondering what Duke's life is like now. Does she think of me? Does she miss me? Or has she found something better in the wild, where ancient creatures still endure? These are questions without answers, carried only by the howl of the wind and the distant sound of something that might be singing or might just be the mountain breathing in its sleep. The security footage remains my only proof that any of this truly happened. 47 seconds of the impossible, which I watch obsessively, searching for clues about what Duke saw that I could not. What could have compelled her strongly enough to walk away from years of domestication and loyalty? Sometimes I think I catch it in her expression in those final frames, a joy or recognition that suggests she wasn't taken, but that she went home. The young couple who bought the farm lasted exactly 73 days. I know this because Tom Henley, the real estate broker who handled the sale, called me in frustration, wanting to know what I hadn't disclosed about the property. The buyers, software engineers from Portland with dreams of sustainable farming, fled in the middle of the night, leaving behind most of their belongings and a barn full of expensive heritage breed chickens. They wouldn't tell Tom exactly what drove them out. They only repeated that the forest was wrong and demanded their deposit back. I could have warned them, maybe I should have, but how do you explain that the land exists in a careful balance between two worlds? That my dog chose to sacrifice herself to creatures that should not exist, forging a peace pact written in a language no human could ever read? They wouldn't have believed me anyway. City people never do until they see for themselves. And by then it's usually too late. The farm has been on the market for 6 months now without a single serious offer. The price keeps dropping, but rumors spread faster than the listing. In rural communities, people whisper about Ted's place being cursed, about strange sounds, about giant footprints, about the man who abandoned everything after his dog disappeared into the forest. They're not entirely wrong, but they don't understand the truth. The curse isn't malicious. It's a boundary, a line drawn between civilization and something older that refuses to be erased by human expansion. Now I live in Spokane, in a third-floor, 2-bedroom apartment that smells of industrial carpet cleaner and other people's cooking. No yard, no dogs, no connection to the earth that sustained my family for generations. I work at a downtown veterinary clinic, treating pampered pets who have never known true freedom or real danger. The other vets think I'm odd, too quiet, too intense when I examine dogs that stare too long out the window or strain too hard toward the park. They don't realize I'm looking for signs, checking to see if these animals feel the same call of the wild that Duke answered. Every few weeks I drive back to check on the farm. The house stands empty but intact, slowly being reclaimed by Virginia creeper and wild roses. The barn, once alive with 23 rescued dogs, now holds only shadows and memory, but the security cameras still run. The solar panels keep them alive. Here, storms pass around us instead of through us. It's as if Duke's sacrifice created a protective bubble encompassing everything inside the property's borders. But the cost of that protection presses on me every day. Every adoption of a joyful dog reminds me of the one who will never come home. Every quiet night echoes the terror that came before it. Every flicker of movement on the tree line makes me wonder whether she's out there watching, approving, or judging how well I honored our bargain. The guilt of letting her go, even though I know I had no real choice, eats at me like acid. A better man might have fought harder, found another way, saved both Duke and the farm. But I was not that man. I was only the witness to something impossible, the one who survived, carrying only knowledge. Winter returned. Early snow blanketed the mountains. The dogs are safe in their warm kennels, fed and cared for, protected by Duke's sacrifice. Each evening I stand on the porch staring toward the woods, wondering what Duke's life is like now. Does she remember me? Does she miss me? Or has she found something better in the wild, where ancient beings still endure? These are questions with no answers, Only the howl of the wind and the faint sound of something that might be singing, or might simply be the mountain breathing in its sleep. The security footage remains my only proof that any of this actually happened. 47 seconds of the impossible that I watch obsessively, searching for clues about what Duke saw that I could not. What compelled her so strongly that she walked away from years of domestication and loyalty? Sometimes I think I catch it in her expression in those final frames, a joy, a recognition that suggests she wasn't taken but went home. The young couple who bought the farm lasted exactly 73 days. I know because Tom Henley, the real estate broker who handled the sale, called me in frustration, demanding to know what I hadn't disclosed about the property. The buyers, software engineers from Portland dreaming of sustainable farming, fled in the middle of the night, leaving most of their possessions behind and a barn full of expensive heritage chickens. They wouldn't tell Tom exactly why they left, only that the forest was wrong and they demanded their deposit back. I could have warned them, maybe I should have. But how do you explain that the land exists in a careful balance between two worlds? That my dog willingly sacrificed herself to beings that should not exist, forging a piece written in a language no human can read? They wouldn't have believed me anyway. City people never do until they experience it themselves, and by then it's usually too late. The farm has been on the market for 6 months with no serious interest. The price keeps dropping, but rumors spread through the rural communities. Locals whisper that Ted's place is cursed about strange sounds, giant footprints, and the man who left everything behind after his dog disappeared into the woods. They aren't entirely wrong, but they don't grasp the truth. The curse is not malevolent. It's a boundary, a line drawn between civilization and something older that refuses to be erased by human expansion. I now live in Spokane, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor that smells of industrial carpet cleaner and other people's cooking. No yard, no dogs, no connection to the land that sustained my family for generations. I work at a downtown veterinary clinic, treating pampered pets that have never known true freedom or real danger. The other vets think I'm strange, too quiet, too intense when I examine dogs that stare too long out the window or strain toward the park. They don't realize I'm looking for signs, checking whether these animals feel the same wild call that Duke answered. Every few weeks, I drive back to the farm. The house stands empty but intact, slowly being reclaimed by Virginia creeper and wild roses. The barn that once housed 23 rescued dogs now holds only shadows and memory. But the security cameras still run. Solar panels keep them powered. They upload their footage to the cloud, and I watch it obsessively. What it shows is both comfort and torment. Duke appears frequently in the recordings, always at night, always at the edge of the woods where darkness blends with the old lamp-lit light. She has changed in ways that are hard to define but impossible to ignore. Her coat is fuller, wilder, a radiance that suggests vigorous health. She moves differently too, more agile, more purposeful, as if she has shed the last traces of domestication and become something entirely new. But it's her eyes that have changed most. Even in grainy infrared footage, they burn with an intelligence far beyond what any dog should possess. She is never alone. The beings that travel with her, sometimes one, sometimes many, treat her not as a pet or prisoner, but as an equal. They communicate in gestures and sounds I cannot understand, a language that seems part animal, part human, and part something else that makes my brain ache to process. Duke participates fully in these exchanges. Her barks and low cries carry cadences, suggesting complex meaning. She is not merely living with them, she has, in some fundamental way, become one of them, beyond mere physical closeness. Last Tuesday's footage captured her most clearly. She approached closer than usual, right up to the kennel door, and sat exactly where she used to wait for me each morning. The being with her, the giant that once took her, stood behind, like protector or companion, marked by the same distinctive scar on its shoulder. For 13 minutes, Duke stared straight into the camera, her tail wagging slowly and deliberately, as if sending a message in Morse code. Then she rose, walked to the collar that still hung there, and gently touched it with her nose before turning back toward the woods. I analyzed that clip hundreds of times, searching for signs of coercion or suffering. I found only what looked like longing and affectionate remembrance of a life she had chosen to leave behind. The creature waited patiently while she paid her respects. Then they left together, Duke proud and confident, every inch of her conveying satisfaction with her choice. That pain is worse than having her stolen. At least theft would have let me rage at injustice instead of wrestling with abandonment. Even if that abandonment was noble, my research since that night has led me down rabbit holes that challenge everything I thought I knew about the world. Indigenous stories across the Pacific Northwest speak of wild beings, giants of the forest that have always been here, long before humans, and will remain long after we're gone. Those tales often mention dogs choosing to join them, not taken, but called answering to something in their genes that reaches back to a time before the line between wild and tame existed. Some tribes consider a dog's choosing an honor, a sign that a family raised something extraordinary enough to bridge worlds. I found other accounts tucked away in local historical societies and dismissed as folklore. Trappers in the 1800s wrote of dogs vanishing into the woods and later being seen running with upright creatures. Settler journals record beloved pets answering calls humans could not hear. A veterinarian in the 1960 seconds documented physical changes in dogs living near certain wild areas, changes he could not explain, but that suggested rapid evolution or the awakening of latent traits. All were dismissed as superstition or misidentification. Now I recognize those patterns. The hardest part is the dreams. Each night I return to the farm in my sleep, and Duke is there, trying to show me something vital I cannot fully comprehend. She shows me images of her new life, vast caverns lit by bioluminescent fungi, gatherings of those beings that look like ritual or council, dogs of every breed living wild but organized and purposeful. She is trying to make me understand that she didn't abandon me, she moved on to something my mind cannot grasp. In the dream, I almost understand. I almost see the logic of it. Then I wake and the understanding dissolves like morning fog. Dr. Reeves diagnosed me with complicated grief disorder. She said, "You've transferred unresolved feelings about Emma's death into Duke's disappearance, creating a complex fiction to avoid processing real loss." She prescribed medications for anxiety and depression, and though they dull the part of me that knows the truth, I take them because functioning in the ordinary world requires a measure of willful blindness to what lurks at its edges. I began writing it all down, not to publish, but to preserve. One day others will go through what I did. They will lose a beloved companion to the call of wild things. Maybe they will find comfort in knowing they weren't alone or mad. I write about Duke's intelligence, her deliberate choice, the bargain that still protects the farm even in her absence. I write about beings that are neither animal nor human, entities outside our classificatory systems. I write about the 47 seconds of footage that prove impossible things still exist among us. In time, the farm will sell. Someone will buy it for the land value, tear down Ted's house and kennel, and build something modern and sterile that ignores the history soaked into that soil. They will clear the woods, install bright lights, maybe pave the old dirt road. The creatures will retreat deeper into the wilderness, taking the chosen dogs with them and becoming the stuff of legends future generations will dismiss. The barrier between worlds will thicken until even the memory of its presence fades. For now, the farm still stands as a monument to that permeability. Duke's collar still hangs on the kennel door, a bridge between what was and what island. The security cameras keep recording the nighttime visits of things that should not exist, and somewhere in the dark between the trees, my dog lives a life I cannot imagine but must accept as her truth. She chose them, not me. She chose wildness over domestication. She chose freedom over safety. I cannot bring myself to forgive her for that choice, because there is nothing to forgive. She became the being she was always meant to be. Sometimes I wake up expecting to see her beside the bed. I still reach for her leash before remembering it hangs useless in my closet. I still buy her favorite treats before catching myself at the checkout counter. Loving habits are harder to let go of than love itself, lingering like phantom limbs that ache when the weather shifts and drag me back to that December night. People say it gets easier with time, but they're talking about ordinary loss, not the particular agony of being chosen against, of being weighed and found less important than a call you could never hear. My life now is small, controlled, safe, sealed off from mysteries that might demand sacrifice. I treat suburban dogs with suburban problems, prescribing pills for anxieties rooted in nothing scarier than a doorbell or a vacuum cleaner. I come home to an empty apartment, eat dinner alone, watch television shows about people whose greatest challenges revolve around love lives or career changes. It's a half-life, an existence in shadow, but it's the only one I have left. I know what I know. I've seen what I've seen. The footage haunts me because it proves I'm not crazy, but it also proves I don't matter. In those 47 seconds, the universe revealed itself as far stranger and more complex than human understanding allows, and my only role was to witness and then step aside. Duke didn't need my permission or comprehension to transform into something beyond domestication. The creatures never cared about my weapons or locks or frantic attempts to protect what couldn't be protected. The so-called bargain that kept the farm safe wasn't really a bargain at all, just their acknowledgement that I had finally understood my place in a hierarchy humans can't surpass. Next month will mark a year since that night. I plan to drive back to the farm, not to check the cameras or maintain the property, but to sit in the kennel where it happened and try to make peace with Duke's choice. Maybe she'll appear at the tree line, changed but still recognizable. Maybe the creatures will let me glimpse what she has become. Or maybe I'll sit alone in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of 23 scarred dogs and one unscarred but transcendent, finally accepting that some stories don't end in ways that satisfy our human need for closure. The Portland couple still email me sometimes, asking if I know what really happened at the farm, if I experienced anything unusual during my time there. I carefully craft half-truths about wildlife and isolation, about the challenges of rural life and the importance of respecting natural boundaries. I never tell them about Duke, or the pact, or the footage that would confirm their worst fears. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share, carrying responsibilities most people aren't equipped to handle. Better to let them believe the stress and isolation played tricks on their minds. That's kinder than the truth. Now my burden is knowing that the impossible is real, that dogs can choose the wild over love, that creatures beyond human comprehension share our world and sometimes claim fragments of it as their own. I carry Duke's memory not as a wound, but as a lesson in the limits of human significance. We think we're the pinnacle of evolution, the masters of nature. In truth, we're just another species scrambling to survive in a world far stranger than we're willing to admit. The security footage remains both my proof and my punishment. 47 seconds that changed everything, that exposed the truth of Duke's nature and the smallness of my own. I watch it when the loneliness becomes unbearable, when I need to remember that what happened was real, that Duke's choice, however painful, was genuine. She stepped into that darkness with such purpose, such joy, that I can't deny she found something worth leaving everything else behind. Somewhere tonight, she's running through forests untouched by axes, hunting alongside companions who walk on two legs and speak in languages older than human speech. She is free in a way no house dog ever could be, transformed into something that bridges the gap between what we know and what we refuse to acknowledge. And I remain here, in my apartment, surrounded by the safety of civilization, forever altered by the knowledge that my dog chose the mystery that swallowed her, chose the impossible over the known, chose to become something I loved her too much to hold back from becoming. The footage ends at second 47, but the story continues every night in the dark between the trees, in the howls that carry messages I'll never decode, in the footprints pressed into fresh snow around an abandoned farm in northern Idaho. Duke lives out there in a truth that makes all our understanding of the world feel like a comforting lie, and I'm left to bear witness to a choice I could neither prevent nor reverse even if I wanted to. Because love sometimes means letting go even when what you're letting go of defies everything you thought were the laws of nature itself. My name is Samuel Carson, and my dog was taken by Sasquatch. But she went willingly, and that makes all the difference.